And we also did in 2016 two surveys on emotional health and well-being, and just tell you a little bit about some of the results of that, because I think it puts in context why this is such an important issue. Next slide, Ali, please. So this, as I say, was quite large surveys, and the first one was about for people who were living with cardiomyopathy, and we got almost 400 responses to that. But it's the impact of living with cardiomyopathy is not just, as many of you will know, on the individual. It has a big impact on families and people who are in caring roles. And so we did a separate survey for that, slightly smaller number of responses, but some very, very good information. Next slide, please. So one of the questions we asked was, how much does cardiomyopathy affect your emotional well-being? Well, as you see there, about a fifth of people said it affects me all or most of the time. That's a lot. And then about a third of people said it affects me some of the time. So about 50% it was some of the time or most of the time. And then only 13% said occasionally or rarely. And amazingly, under 10% said it doesn't affect my emotional well-being. Well, two things to bring out of that. Yes, we are different. We are all different. And the fact that one of us is affected one way doesn't mean this everybody will. What it does mean, however, is that a lot of people are affected a lot of the time. Next slide, please. And here are just some quotes, because figures can seem a bit remote, and there are people behind all these figures. The first one shows how extreme it can be. You can read that. My confidence has been shattered. I do not function as well as I would normally. That's somebody who's really been badly affected by it. The second one is a bit more balanced in the sense that it's somebody saying, well, it's a chronic condition, it's omnipresent, and there's occasional nag that I have it. And then the last one is, I think, a very important one, because it shows how things change over time. And so people very often say it was much more difficult at first, but I've got better used to it. And that is also about how people have learned to get support and get help with it. Can we have the next one, Ali? Another couple of quotes. In terms of when we were asking people what sort of support they would like to help, and interesting one there, a chance to talk about things which worry you but don't come up in your consultant appointment, ideally a one-to-one chat or a small group. Now, that point about not coming up in regular care is a recurrent theme, which we'll come back to. Somebody who's looking for something a bit more specific, saying, I would benefit from specialist advice specific to my diagnosis, my prognosis, and individual to me. So again, not everybody's looking for the same thing. And the third one is, I think, one of the more interesting ones, but I think that one that may resonate with a lot of people who are living with the condition, about how difficult it can be to ask for emotional support, and the feeling that it's all down to us, the people with the condition, because the services we receive, which can be absolutely great for the physical side of our condition, aren't necessarily there in the way that we currently might want them. And that's a big part about what cardiomyopathy is doing. If we could move on to the next one, Ali. So when would you like support? As you would expect, it's very different. When people start first starting symptoms, although that might be more complex, because very often, and we know from previous surveys, it takes a long time to actually get diagnosed. And very often people have to go through a process of that. But when you're diagnosed, and I think that is very important, but there are also various stages of this, like quite a few people with the diagnosis will then go on to have an ICD or sometimes a pacemaker implanted. A very big issue is about genetic testing, and that we know causes a lot of tensions and uncertainties, because it impacts not just on the individual, but it impacts on other family members. And quite often within families, there are very mixed views about whether or not it's the right thing to do. And we've seen in many cases a lot of tension within that, people wanting to do the right thing and then being unclear. And that's one of the areas which we've done quite a lot of work with our colleagues in that field. talking about when the condition gets worse, clearly, although some people stay very stable and some people with new medications actually significantly improve, that if things are getting worse, it can put a pressure on people and they feel they want to talk. So they might have been quite happy about it, they're quite stable with it, and then they need to have a bit more support. And as many of you will know, for some people, including myself, we go on to develop heart failure, a very unhelpfully term, because it just means that the heart is working less effectively, but it does impact on you and the things you can do. So again, these are the sort of areas, and there will be many others. So what it's saying is we are all different and we all have different experiences. So there is no one size fits all that would help all of us in terms of support. If we go on, Ali. And here's a couple of other quotes, and somebody who'd had their first shock from their ICD, and there was nobody to talk to who understand my emotional feelings, so that you will always get support for the impact, the physical health impact. You will get checked up, but to talk about what it feels like. And as somebody who's had in the past quite a lot of inappropriate shocks, that's a shock that wasn't necessary but was caused by another type of heart rate pressure. I think it is very important. The other one's an interesting one, because this is from somebody who has been really depressed and didn't feel that they could speak to anyone, but finding that their partner was able to speak to one of the volunteers. We have the peer volunteers with lived experience, and through that, both of them were supported even at the worst time. So it's an important thing to realize that provided we are able to make connections and want to make connections, there are a lot of people out there that are willing to help even at the worst of times. If we move on, Ali. So other key findings that came out from our surveys is that, and this I think is extremely important, the majority of people with cardiomyopathy have not been asked about the emotional impact by any healthcare professional. Now, that might surprise you when you look at the size and numbers of people with this. And this isn't just about being asked by the cardiology team or the nurse, specialist nurse, or the consultant. It's also in primary care. On the other side of the coin, most people have not brought up the emotional impact with any healthcare professional. And again, you think, well, surely, but for people who've been to clinics and know how busy they are and how much time and the pressure that's there, it doesn't always feel easy. And in fact, possibly people don't feel that's the right setting. Other things that came up were that some people are comfortable discussing the emotional impact with family or friends, but that isn't always easy. One of the things that came out from our survey of people who were supporting people living with cardiomyopathy is that there was a real tension in that the person with cardiomyopathy might be loath to share their worries with or concerns with their family members in case they worried more. And similarly, family members who are worrying about things may hold back from sharing them because it's very difficult. And if we think about that, whether you have cardiomyopathy or not, in our families, sometimes, yes, the family is the best person to share things with, but if it's something that affects the family, it's clearly not always easy, and that's why we may need other options. And the final one there is that over a third of people don't feel able to discuss the emotional impact with anyone. So there's a lot of people with a lot of concerns and a lot of issues, but they feel that they haven't got anybody that they can talk to about that. We move on, Ali. So what were the implications for the Cardiomyopathy UK? Well, firstly, I think we have, and hopefully you will have seen, those of you who have been involved with the charity, we've tried to encourage people to talk about the emotional impact of the condition. We've done this in support groups, we've done it through, as now at the annual conference, but we've also produced a lot of material. And I think if we can normalize this so that all of us who are living with the condition and our families can acknowledge that it's a lot of tension, and it is something I think that we need to be able to deal with. We've also spent a lot of time working with colleagues who are running services for people with cardiomyopathy to see this as a significant issue. And we have done this in a variety of ways. We've brought together cardiology teams and people with direct experience, plus mental health specialists, and try to encourage closer collaboration so that where necessary, and most people won't necessarily need specialist services, but when they do, they can access them. And also that people within the cardiology teams are more confident about addressing these types of issues. And of course, one of the big things is, and this is what Ali will tell you about in some detail, is make sure all of our services are able to address the emotional impact of cardiomyopathy, because actually, this is where people turn. They may turn in the first instance for aspects of their physical health, but it was interesting, one quote that I haven't got here, but it sticks with me, of somebody saying, well, cardiomyopathy is obviously a physical disorder, but actually it's been far harder to deal with the emotional impact than the physical impact. So just before we hand over to Ali, if I could put up the next slide, Ali. And this is about, because an underlying theme of this conference is about resilience. And we wanted to make the point that sometimes resilience is seen as on the top quote, the steely resolve of a person who's never phased and picks themselves up over and over again. And that's a very traditional way of looking at resilience. And frankly, it's not helpful because it implies that we should all be able to deal with everything. And if we just work hard enough and are tough enough, we'll get there. That's not a core belief in nowadays about resilience. Rather, as in the second quote, resilience is about looking after ourselves. It's about being able to seek help and accessing support from relevant agencies. So everything we're saying is this is not about something that we should be able to sort out on our own. And the healthiest people in the healthiest ways are, as it says in the final one, it's not an underlying trait, it's something you do. And feeling negative emotions or relying on others can be part of it. And we are very keen to encourage all of us who are living with the condition and our families to think of this as something that having if you're diagnosed, and particularly if you make, as most of us do, the mistake of looking up, Dr. Google, clearly you go into all sorts of concerns. And I think what we need to do is actually say, yeah, there's a lot of exaggerated concerns, a lot of misleading stuff on the internet, but actually having a concern about your physical health is healthy. And indeed, I would be much more worried about somebody who isn't concerned about the condition, and much more concerned too about somebody who feels they cannot seek help and ask others. So with that, I'll pass you over to Ali.
Thank you, Ian. Good morning, everyone. Some of you may know me. Hello to you. And for those who don't, hello and welcome to you. So we looked at there about the need for the charity to look more at supporting people with their emotional well-being, which I think we do quite well. We have obviously the clinical support through our nurse helpline and our Facebook lives and our clinical advisory group who feed into all that the charity does. But we also look at supporting people's emotional well-being and also their welfare and rights well-being. So it's a holistic package. So I've just noticed this is quite timely because one of the questions that's just been put into the group is what are the options for further support? So hopefully I should be able to articulate those to you, and then we will, Ian and I will answer some of the questions that have also been shared with us. So we provide one-to-one emotional support through our lived experience community peer support volunteers. Now we recognise that it is not just people who are directly affected by cardiomyopathy insofar as they've been diagnosed, We have, obviously, with that person who's been diagnosed, we have carers, we have partners, we have mums, dads, children, young people, siblings. So with the affected person, there are also wider affected people who, when the person whom they're close to has had a diagnosis of cardiomyopathy, they feel that they need some support, they need to talk and have kind of safe space to share how they're feeling. So we provide, as I've said, one-to-one emotional support through a variety of trained volunteers. So some have the condition themselves, some might be a partner of someone with the condition, someone might be a parent of someone with the condition. So we try to ensure that it's not just the person who's directly affected through diagnosis, that it's actually the wider support network who are supported by our one-to-one community peer support volunteers. We have our telephone volunteers who provide the support over the phone. Some people prefer to do it via email or over text. If they don't feel they're able at that point in time to speak, then we provide that as well. We also have our support groups. We have a huge network and growing of support groups across the UK. So there's one in Northern Ireland, Scotland, there's two in Wales, and there's fair coverage, but improving across England. The support groups are a really good way to kind of meet people face to face or online, as has happened through the pandemic, who also have that shared experience of either supporting someone with cardiomyopathy or having cardiomyopathy themselves. We have issue-specific support groups. So we might have, sometimes we'll run a group that's for people who are affected by, say, Takotsubo cardiomyopathy or dilated cardiomyopathy. And then we have other groups that are focused more specifically around emotional well-being and as opposed to kind of just giving an overview of a typical cardiomyopathy. So we have different issue-specific and condition-specific groups. We're also looking to run a parents and carers support group for mums, dads, caregivers, and anyone involved in the care of a child or young person with cardiomyopathy. Now, when we look at that 33% of people who don't feel they're able to talk to anyone about their emotional well-being, we introduce the coffee and catch-up. So our coffee and catch-up sessions are hugely popular. They're quite different from our traditional support groups, and they operate via Zoom, so online, every Friday at 2 p.m. and they're for an hour, and we have one a month on an evening for those who are working and can't make the Friday. Now, what coffee and catch-up is very relaxed. There are people affected by the condition, and they come together and they just chat. Simply that, just chat about the week, how things are going, and it's, you know, there's a lot of different topics that people talk about, and I've put there that it's respite because that's what it was originally set up to do. These groups were established to provide respite through the pandemic, to bring people together safely online and kind of give a little bit of respite, a little bit of relief from the constant barrage from the media about COVID-19. So it was just a safe space for people to just share. They're great fun. So for people who don't feel they're at a point where they want to talk about or even engage with thinking about their emotional well-being, then that's a really good place for you because you can just talk about anything or nothing, and it's a great space. We also provide signposting. Cardiomyopathy UK is very good at many things, but we recognise that we're not, say, the experts in bereavement support or different areas of emotional well-being. So we do encourage, we empower our clients and our service users if there's something that they need that we perhaps aren't the experts for. We will still walk with our people throughout their journey, but if there's something like bereavement where perhaps we're not the best placed, we will help support that client if they wish to talk to other charities and other providers of support so that best meets their needs. We have a group for people affected by heart failure. And we also have a group for people who are looking to receive a transplant, so they're on the transplant waiting list. Now, these are specific groups with people with specific concerns, both physical and logistical, but also emotional around those areas. So please do look at our website for more information on those. So all of our volunteers are highly trained. I know that because I train them. So they have to undertake telephone assessments. They also have to complete a mandatory training course, which they are assessed on. And we have the training that they have is very wide and very varied. So that you can be assured that any volunteer that you speak to understands the need for confidentiality. They understand how people can feel differently, perhaps differently from themselves, or how they would react in a certain situation. So they're able to provide a trained listening ear and a supportive ear, and to kind of just be there when our people need them most. Our staff are trained, highly trained and experienced, so they have their own kind of qualifications, experience and knowledge of supporting people with long-term health conditions. Of course, we have our wonderful cardiac specialist nurses on the helpline who are there 8:30 till 4:30 Monday to Friday, and they're available on our helpline and also in our closed Facebook groups. We have quite a diverse peer network, and that's increasing all the time, the diversity of our peers. So we have children and young people, we have people with the more kind of, I'd say, the perhaps not as common cardiomyopathies, who are available to talk to about lived experience. We have people who've been successfully transplanted. We have people who've perhaps been bereaved through the death of someone close, that they can kind of share lived experience with people. So we have quite a diverse peer network. We do provide welfare and benefit advice. It is a kind of a smallish service, but we can help people to challenge claims for personal independence payment, which perhaps haven't been successful. We can help people challenge those quite effectively. We ensure that all of our work, that means the staff and the volunteers, that we have empathy and our congruence, and we understand. So we're always trying to improve our understanding by ongoing training for ourselves and our volunteers, and talking to our community regularly about different aspects of what concerns them. So we make sure that we have this kind of empathy and this trust and honesty from the charity and our staff and volunteers through all that we do. We support people with all types of cardiomyopathies, as well as myocarditis. And the survey, some of the statistics and findings that Ian articulated just now, they are part of a range of surveys that we put out periodically to our community, our service user community, to ensure that we are doing what we should be doing, and that we're going in the direction that our community want us and feel we need to be going in. We also talk regularly on the phone to service users, to volunteers. We, on our Facebook group, the charity's always trying to ensure that we are being led by yourselves as to what you need to live well, physically, emotionally, and kind of psychosocially, and with regard to welfare. So, I mean, it's kind of, when somebody says to me, what makes you different to other kind of heart charities or other healthcare charities? And I think that these here would be my responses, that we have a specific cardiac specialist helpline nurse team. So they are there to give you clinical advice and guidance in between appointments, to perhaps bounce concerns off if you've had a report, or you've had an appointment with a clinician that you're not sure about, or there's something you don't understand, perhaps the jargon. Then they're there to kind of help and support you. We are multidisciplined, so like I say, we provide the clinical information, advice and support, also the emotional well-being, the peer lived experience support, and the welfare and benefits and welfare rights. So we have that multidisciplined approach. We are respected by clinicians. We have, if you took a look at our clinical advisory group, you will see a number of respected and renowned clinicians who are involved in ensuring that the charity is always at the forefront of cardiomyopathy support and research. And also the fact that we are funded by BBC Children in Need, the National Lottery. These are funders who clearly see, and we have had refunding with the lottery, so you can see that they have great respect for the work that we do, and they can see that we kind of get the results that we need to for our community. We are always growing, but we still retain that kind of familial feel. So, you know, any of the staff in here will be able to tell you who our volunteers are. They will know a lot of our service users. They will know about our service users' dogs and different things like that, because we are a family. So although we grow, we still have that very sort of compact family feel, which I think is quite rare, but is very, very precious in the third sector today. All of our staff and all of our volunteers are committed to making sure that anyone affected by cardiomyopathy, again, either with a direct diagnosis or affected as a carer or supporter of someone with cardiomyopathy, that they can all live happy, healthy, fulfilling lives. And we are very much a community charity. Everything that we do is based within the heart of our community. Our services are shaped by our community. If you look at our trustee board, as our chair said earlier this morning in her welcome, the majority of the board have a direct link with the condition. So we understand what the needs of our community are, and we adapt. You know, we're very adaptive. The pandemic saw us receive 300 telephone calls to our helpline in the month of March. If you look at our averages between 70 and 90 helpline calls, so 300. So we extended our helpline service. We created the coffee and catch-up respite sessions to run weekly. And we also ensured that most of the support groups had online support for psychosocial well-being as well. So what we are trying, as I've said, we're always evolving and trying to go further for our community. So one of the things that myself and Ian actually are involved in is looking at reaching out to those communities that we know are affected by cardiomyopathy because they've come to us during the pandemic, but perhaps would not have come to us ordinarily, or there are people out there who have cardiomyopathy who's still not aware of the charity. So myself and Ian and some of our colleagues, clinical and volunteer colleagues, are looking at how we reach further into that community, into those different communities. We are looking at animated resources for children. So I'm talking about the kind of 4 to 9-year-olds. We are at this very moment looking at, well, we're creating an animated cartoon, 90-second cartoon aimed at this specific age group who have cardiomyopathy, to help them understand, because we understand that if children are given informative advice about their condition early on in ways they can understand, then they're more likely to foster that kind of resilience, that health resilience, further into adulthood. And as I'd said, as I touched on briefly, we have the supportive spaces for people who have who are on the transplant assessment list, and also those with advanced heart failure. We have very recently just published the first 2 modules of our medical education program. So this is an online clinical course aimed at clinicians, so GPs, cardiac nurses, to help them identify cardiomyopathy and to think cardiomyopathy when they see a patient. So this is really, really important. This again is at the heart of the charity, is early identification of the condition, prompt identification of the condition, and fair access to treatment, which is also where our Changemaker project comes in. We are engaged in lots of research, and I know that this afternoon some of you might be attending our research roundup, so you'll hear more about that. But if you're not intending to attend those, then please do take a look at our website and social media, because that keeps you up to date with all the research that we're involved in. Again, as mentioned, our person-focused support training for all of our volunteers is very extensive, and it's ongoing. So they have ongoing training throughout the year, each year, so that they're upskilled and up to date with all of their training. And these are just some of the voices from our community. We asked people, this is a survey that we ran last year when the pandemic broke in the UK, and we asked people how they felt emotionally before they used our services and how they felt after, and how important or not important they rated Cardiomyopathy UK's services. And we were very pleased to see that everyone had said that they felt much better after using our services at their emotional well-being, even those people who wouldn't normally attend a support group or wouldn't normally ring the helpline, had said that by doing so, they had felt a lot better. And I think that this is really important. So we see that word there at the end of that first quotation, empathy. And I'm really pleased to see that, because that's something that the staff and the volunteers, that's kind of our word du jour, if you like, empathy. Because a lot of the volunteers have lived experience of cardiomyopathy, but the staff don't. So empathizing and being able to really understand, as far as practicable, what it is like to live with a long-term condition such as cardiomyopathy is essential for us to be able to kind of support effectively people who are diagnosed. So that's kind of at the core. So the fact that that's been resonated back to us by somebody is brilliant. So just to kind of, in our last 15 minutes, I've received a number of questions. So I'm going to put some to Ian. I'll read the questions out, and then Ian and I will do our best to answer as many as we can. For those that we don't answer, Ian and I will endeavour to answer those perhaps after the event. Okay. Ian, the first one, I think this is probably better for you to answer. I feel like many of the things that brought us together as a couple have changed so much. We've had to change our life plans, and we can't do many of the things we used to do together. I'm angry that my partner was dealt this card, and just how unfair that it is. How can we talk about this?
I think that's a very, very important question, Ali, and I think a lot of people will identify with that, because when you receive the diagnosis, or your partner does, it does change things. And I think it is really good if you can acknowledge that. As I said earlier, very often people hold back and say they don't want to say anything, or they say, oh, everything's fine, when actually it isn't. I always think, and this sounds as if it's the partner of somebody with cardiomyopathy who feels concerned for them, and it is being dealt a card, but it is a card that we've got, and we don't have a great deal of choice. I think the thing is to try and see, well, we can no longer do these things, but what else could we do? And be willing to say, let's try something different. And be willing to also say, we may try that and it won't work. I know from my wife and myself, we've things that we used to do, I'm no longer able to do. And some of those things we don't do, but there are some that she can do with other people. And I'm very pleased for that. And she said, oh, I feel guilty about doing that. I said, no, that's good. But then there are other things that we can do together. But the biggest and most important thing is actually being able to talk about it and share some of those concerns. And sometimes, I don't know if the person looks at the Facebook group as a member of the Facebook group, but it's very good, because a lot of the things that come up there are similar to this. And a lot of them are about how we adjust to living with the condition. So I'd strongly encourage a conversation, or if you're able to join a support group, maybe just as observers. Now, some support groups are mainly for people with the experience, but some are also for carers, and some have separate sessions, or they join together and then do it. I'd really encourage you to do that and listen to what other people have done, and maybe, and this applies to all of the things we'll talk about, be able to see this through the eyes of somebody else. You know, if this wasn't you, what would you be suggesting to your sister, your husband, sorry, another friend? Because most of us can be very hard on each other, but don't be surprised that you are angry, but you're angry with the condition, not with the person with it.
Thank you, Ian. I'm going to take the next one. With a 15-year-old grandson who had an SICD, so that's a subcutaneous ICD, implanted a year ago, and doesn't talk about his condition, it's very hard to know if he's really emotionally okay or just being a teenager. Any advice? Well, that's yes, in a nutshell. We have a closed Facebook for 14 to 25-year-olds. So if you want to email me, which you can find my email address on the website, I can share with you the link. We also have peer support volunteers who have been 15-year-old boys who have, you know, similar condition with an SICD, who can actually share with your grandson if that's what he wants, and it can be done over WhatsApp, it can be done over text, or however is most applicable to your grandson. We also are improving our resources, and if you look for children and young people, and if you take a look at our website under the children and young people section, you will find an information resource that you might want to kind of slip your grandson's way, that talks about not just the physical but the emotional aspects of growing up and maturing with a device and a long-term condition. So there's lots of help available. Also, if you're worried, we have and you wanted to check anything out, we have a pediatric out of hours helpline which operates every other Wednesday, and that is from 6 till 9, and that's via our helpline, and that's staffed by our paediatric nurse. So that's welcome to not just children, young people, but also nans, granddads, mums, dads, caregivers, educators, anyone who is invested in the well-being of a young person affected by cardiomyopathy. Ian, I think the next one is for you. Because of COVID, I feel nervous about going out and mixing with other people, which has limited my social activities. When I do go out where there are other people, I feel anxious and I want to leave. I'm worried that I'm putting too much pressure on my partner.
I think that's something, again, that many people will identify with, because COVID has put additional pressures on all of us. And I think a degree of anxiety about going out is very natural, particularly when we know that despite things being so much better, there are still high levels of infection out there. The person doesn't say if they've had the opportunity to talk to their partner about this and whether the partner feels pressure. I think, again, it's one of those where you can, if you can find a way of talking about that and then thinking, what are the things that we could do which would allow us to go out? And we would have some contact with other people inevitably, but they are not necessarily going to be in difficult circumstances. I think you can envisage places which are quite open and where there is maybe good ventilation, where people are much more likely to wear masks, and try and avoid those places which are maybe the opposite of that, and where people aren't being as thoughtful and as considerate. But it is very important that we don't just withdraw. It's tempting, but I think if we do, it can be difficult. So what I would encourage you to do is spend a bit of time going out. If you're finding it really hard, as Ali said earlier, we signpost to other services, and there is a service that's available to all of us called Improving Access to Psychological Therapies, which you can refer yourself to talk with a person with professional training who can help you deal with some of those anxieties and think about strategies that might make it easier. Again, that information is on our website, and if you can't find it specifically there, I'm sure Ali or colleagues would be able to direct you to it.
Certainly. Thanks, Ian. I will take the next one. I saw in some of the lived experience videos that people talked about having a purpose by doing things like volunteering. I feel like now is a time to take care of myself. Is there any proof that volunteering is good for you? Yes, there's been lots of studies and research that's been undertaken which support the fact that volunteering has been linked to increased feelings of well-being, improved self-esteem. It fosters a sense of belonging in people, and it reduces self-isolation. So what Ian was just saying there about the temptation to withdraw, volunteering is kind of the antidote to that. We have lots of volunteering opportunities. We're always looking for new community peer support volunteers to join our existing community. So please do get in touch. You could become a support group leader, in-clinic volunteer. You could just do telephone volunteering, whatever, or a Facebook admin. So please do get in touch with me. And then myself and my colleague, Christy Jones, who's our community peer support manager, can certainly get in touch with you and help you do that. And if you wanted to look at the research specifically, if you look at the Mental Health Foundation website, that's the MHF, and that has a link to all the studies that support how important volunteering is for one's own well-being. I think we've got time just to squeeze in 4 minutes, just to squeeze in one more question. Ian, I think this one for you. My husband is in denial regarding my condition as I appear well most of the time. I'm struggling to help make him see the possible outcomes and to have the discussions regarding the future. Dare I give him hope?
I think it's very important to do that, because when people are in denial, it very often is because they are very frightened of what may happen and they're assuming the worst. And I think sometimes it can be helpful. It's hard to have that conversation if the other person doesn't want to. This is sometimes where sharing material that has been developed by Cardiomyopathy UK about specific issues, that's maybe about particular types of cardiomyopathy or about the likely impact of that, is a good way to start. Somebody might read something, well, they won't sit down and talk about it, or even each of you agree to read it, just because at least then you would know he's got the facts about it. Or if he finds it too hard to talk to you, maybe think about, would he be willing to talk to one of the many, or use one of the many resources that Ali has outlined? Because, as I said before, just because somebody is a member of our family and because they do genuinely care for us doesn't mean that they can necessarily engage. And I think a lot of people find the diagnosis, and families can find the diagnosis even more daunting than we do as people with the condition. So you could also, and may also want to think about for yourself, having the opportunity to talk to maybe one of our peer volunteers who's been in a similar situation and who might be able to think up with you or help you think about alternative ways of dealing with this.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, we literally have 2 minutes left. I'm aware that we have 4 more questions. So what we will do is Ian and I will be in contact with each other after today and get those answered for you. So I hope you understand that we've just run out of time, but we will get those answered for you. And we really hope you have a wonderful day. And thank you for sharing time with us this morning. And we hope you find the rest of the day really informative.
Thank you.